All right, welcome back, everyone. We concluded our last special called session with an executive session. I need a motion to exit executive session from the body.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion to exit executive session from Commissioner Thornton, with a second from Commissioner Hool. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, I'm going to ask Clerk Sarah George to call roll for us for our 6 p.m. special called session.
Davenport.
Here.
Link. Here. Taylor.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Fisher.
Here.
Huel.
Here.
Culpepper.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Thornton.
Here.
Hamby.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Clerk George. We have a mini splendored evening tonight, and so we do have one item of new business we need to consider right now under suspension of rules. May I have a motion for suspension of rules?
So moved. Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Hamby, second from Commissioner Thornton for suspension of rules for the 6 p.m. special called session. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Should ask if there's public input on this item. Is there anyone here to speak to the Olympic Drive emergency culvert replacement? If you are here for that purpose, step right up to the mic. All right, seeing none, I'll bring it behind the rail. Is there a commissioner who'd like to put a motion on the floor? Commissioner
So
Hamby?
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Hamby and a second from Commissioner Myers to approve the Olympic Drive Emergency Culvert Replacement Design Plans and Contract Award. Is there an ordinance to read associated with this? Nope. Existing funds. All right, Commissioner Hamby, any input?
Nope.
Commissioner Myers? No. Input from members of the body? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, it's unanimous. We will get the Olympic Drive culvert replaced for friends who are out there. I do want to go ahead and make some committee assignments since I was unable to be here the first Tuesday of the month. So I have 2 committee assignments for LRC and 2 for GOC. And Madam Clerk, I will email these to you, and I'm going to email them with a couple of attachments because both items that I'm sending to LRC, I have an exhibit for you to consider as part of your deliberations. The first of those items to the Legislative Review Committee is to update the indoor smoking ordinance to include vaping products. The second item is to update the sign ordinance to consider digital signage and billboards and request that the body send a related recommendation to the Planning Commission. So those are the 2 to LRC. To GOC, I'd like to ask you to work on enhancing protections and resources for renters in the community and to consider opportunities for Athens-Clarke County employee engagement and support workforce-wide. So those are the 2 items to GOC. I do need a motion now that we are going to have to utilize at the end of the evening, and the motion will be to enter into executive session to discuss real estate acquisition and/or disposal and to adjourn at the conclusion of that executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Hamby and a second from Commissioner Thornton. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you, everyone. All right, in a very big treat tonight, we have our Athens-Clarke County Poet Laureate, Jeff Fallis, with us. Just so that everybody understands his role to enhance the profile of poets, poetry, and the literary arts in Athens-Clarke County community and beyond. The Athens Cultural Affairs Commission announced his role as Poet Laureate in 2021, assisted by our Athens-Clarke County Leisure Services Arts Division. After an open call for local poets, Jeff was selected, and he has a 2-year term that extended from August 2021 until this coming August 2023. During his term, Jeff has made a number of community appearances, performed public readings, held workshops, visited schools, attended literary and cultural events, and worked to make poems, poetry, and literature more accessible. And so in celebration of National Poetry Month, which is this month, Poet Laureate Jeff Fallis will open this agenda-setting meeting with a poem. So Jeff, if you want to come up to the podium, we are very excited at the original work that he has prepared for us tonight.
All right.
So good evening, sir.
Okay. That good? Everyone hear me? All right.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, and I hope you all are enjoying your National Poetry Month so far. About 200 years ago, Shelley said that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. You guys are the acknowledged ones, so perhaps it's good that we meet and talk for a little while. I've found in my time as poet laureate so far that people are happier when I write special poems for the occasion instead of reading things I've already written. So you guys, I wrote you a special poem for the occasion, and it's called City of Courts. My favorite unsubstantiated theory about Athens goes something like this. The town is built over a massive subterranean quartz deposit, buried deep beneath the red clay and metamorphic gneiss on the surface of the earth. This massive, probably fictional quartz deposit can be used to account for many things. Athens' prodigious musical output, for one. The quartz produces resonances and tones that musicians can receive and then transmit and transform in another configuration, is the way it was explained to me by a gentleman at a house party in Normaltown some 20 years ago. It also somehow accounts for the town's odd off-kilter magic, its sleepy, skewed, visceral, mysterious, mesmeric aura. It also explains why so many people find it so hard to leave here once they've been touched. They are stuck in the pull of that quartz's underground whirlpool, the reach of its extended magnetic radius. Even if you escape Athens geographically, you're still marked by it. You feel the tug of it in the eaves of your brain, the silt in the bottom of the lake of your heart. I'm sure this theory could be easily disproved by a few well-placed calls and emails to the university's Department of Geology, but I find it so appealing I am hesitant to kick dirt on the myth. I imagine a sister city of quartz that grows directly underneath ours, crystalline and branching, sparkling blooms of a liquid that cooled and hardened millions of years before there was even a dream of a city here. I can't decide if this mirror mineral city should be inverted or right side up, but I love the idea of its being in harmony with us, of its hidden frequencies and slow sonorities finding unlikely expression under the sun and stars we walk beneath, its unseen allure and attraction working its way through the soil into bloodstreams and nervous systems, waking and dreaming consciousnesses, urging those who sense it towards a more inspired and impassioned, energetic and open way of being in the world, communicating with and making connections to the concentric circles, the spheres above and below. It has taken years of pessimism for me to get this optimistic. I know it leaves me open to ridicule. Dystopias are cheap and easy and everywhere. Turn on the TV, read the long-form article, doom scroll, chat with the generative pre-trained transformer. Utopias are harder to come by and no longer in favor, naive and out of fashion, impossible to realize. And yet we still need them, still require their idealism, perhaps now more than ever. My utopian Athens entangles the subterranean and the day-to-day, the earthbound and the celestial. It imagines a correspondence, a conversation and call and response between the slow past and an unimaginable future. It involves music and unlikely joy, a commitment to staying in one place and improving what you find there. What is your utopia? What is your dream city? I know. You're too busy for this sort of thing, too immersed in the mire of the practical. I've seen the agenda for tonight's meeting. Fire department purchase of articulating ladder truck, sewer extensions, amendments and items and ordinances, the deep granular minutia of competitively solicited multi-year tire lease contracts. You work where the sausage and laws get made, and the timescale you operate under is incremental and piecemeal, and it requires patience and foresight. It's not quite fair to say it's mineral time, but the work you do demands a quartz-like clarity, one eye on history and one eye on a distant prospect. Nevertheless, I ask you again, what is your dream for this place where you live, this town whose magnetism has kept you in its orbit? What resonances, what harmonies, what blue notes and undertones do you imagine for its future? What deposit will you leave in its soil to be discovered some April the 18th when we are all part of that same soil again? Whatever your own underground city of quartz might be, keep it in mind. Now and again, catch the glint of its light in the corner of your eye and do what you can to make it shine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, in a great way. That was the reminder for why we're all here. So thank you. Appreciate that dearly. Friends, it is that time when we do consider some of that minutia that you heard referenced there. And so it is time for our monthly agenda-setting meeting. Final action will take place the first Tuesday of May on these items. And if business is not concluded by 8:15, there will be a 15-minute break. There are going to be several opportunities for public input tonight. This is not one of the legally required to input opportunities for planning and zoning items, but we will at the front end of the meeting have an opportunity for input on all those planning and zoning items. We'll then have an opportunity for input on the consent agenda. We'll have an opportunity then for old and new business input. And rules of every one of these public input opportunities is suspiciously similar. You will see a light in front of Clerk George's desk. It will turn green when it is time for you to begin speaking, yellow when 30 seconds remain, and red when your 3 minutes has expired. And I will ask you kindly to take your seat. So, once again, now is that time for anyone who is here to speak to one of the planning and zoning items, of which there are 4, to come to the podium. So if you're here to speak to a planning and zoning item, step right up. Please give us your name and let us know the item to which you're speaking. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. My name is Blake Underwood with Stratus Development Group. I'm a citizen of Athens for a little over 20 years now. Going to be speaking on the Jennings Mill Parkway rezone from employment industrial to multifamily. A couple things about this project are it's been before the Planning Commission. I think we brought it before them for the 3rd, maybe the 4th time for a rezone to multifamily. To come up with our plan, we really listened to the feedback from the previous times before the Planning Commission to get to where we are today. We also worked with the neighboring community to the east, which is a single-family community that's completely developed out now. The president of the Homeowners Association actually spoke at the Planning Commission most recently in support of our project, and we did a lot of things to work on our plan to make them even happier with the project and to meet their needs. They support it so much that they're giving us an ingress-egress easement on Classic Road through a small piece of property that they own, and also to the south a utility easement so we can connect up to sewer there as well. So the president is supposed to be at the May 2nd meeting speaking in support, so you can hear it from him directly, not from me. But the reason we're looking at this site and bringing this before you is because obviously we feel like it's a great location for a multifamily project. Number one. Number two, there's a need for more housing in Athens. I think, I've heard from many of you that is a need and a want for the community. This is for the missing middle, if you will. Rental product. And we think it's a good hybrid from, the single family to the east, moving into a townhouse style rental property as the adjacent. And, quite frankly, the neighbors do not want industrial in their backyards. They made that very, very clear to us. And they don't want any commercial next to them because while it was commercial on the, future land use map, it's not commercial now because the flyover never took place over the loop, and it, is really turned residential.
Thank you, Blake.
I run out of time. Appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over to Frank.
Appreciate it. Evening.
Hey, Frank Pittman. I'm here to speak on the same project that the developer spoke on, and I'll just touch on a few things. You know, this, as Blake mentioned, we've had a lot of conversation with the neighbors. We've met with staff. There's a staff report that was issued recommending denial because of a few things, and we've talked to different departments about that. We've agreed to widen some alleys on our project that makes the fire marshal happy. He spoke at the planning commission that said that, you know, if we did that, he was fine. I think there's some sewer issues out there that need to be worked on. In the future, there is sewer capacity today. There were a few, planning commission approved this project with a few conditions, and I wanted to talk on those conditions a little bit, and we'll talk about them again in a second, but just want to get you guys thinking. There was a condition to remove the binding plan. We're obviously good with that. You know, we recommended we offered up a binding plan just so everybody knew what the development was, and that is what the development is going to be, whether or not you guys remove the binding plan. So that's what they want to build. There was a condition to build or dedicate a public road access to the west. We would request that condition not be placed if you guys approve this for a couple reasons. Number one is, as Blake mentioned, the subdivision to the east has been kind enough to work with us to allow access through their subdivision through an access easement, not dedicating right-of-way. So because that's not right-of-way, we could not make that a public road anyway because it would be through an access easement. And the property to the west that the condition is for is also employment industrial. That very well may be rezoned at some point in time, but it also could be an industrial user that then has access through residential, not one but two residential developments, which we don't feel like is a great idea. There was a condition about correcting parking sizes, and that's fine. And then there was a condition about providing adequate backup space on the alleys. Our plan shows the alleys at 16 foot wide, which is what the code requires. From my conversation with the fire marshal, we had agreed to widen those to 20 feet, which made him happy there, and he said he was good with that. And then I'll close with two statements. The Economic Development Department, as you'll see in the staff report, says they do not think employment industrial is likely to come to this site. And therefore, for it to be developed, it probably needs to be residential property. And then the last statement is along the similar lines. During the planning commission meeting, there was, and this was on a different rezone, the one that number one on your item here, part of the planning staff's presentation, they made a statement that said as these industrial users come about, they don't want to build within a mile of residential property. And if that's the case, this is right beside a subdivision. It would not be conducive to industrial development.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Sorry.
Is anyone else here to speak to any of the planning and zoning items on our agenda tonight? Evening.
Good evening to the mayor and commission. My name is John L. Simpson. I'm an attorney with Fortson, Bentley, and Griffin. I'm also a resident of Athens, live on the east side. I'm proud to live on the east side over in Cedar Creek. I'm here tonight to speak to the rezone of the Olympic Drive matter. I guess I'll go ahead and address the elephant in the room, because when I mention I'm here on behalf of Olympic Drive, it's sort of like announcing the McRib. I get the response, it's back. So it is back, and there was some controversy and scuttlebutt with the first time that this developer tried to bring this project along. This developer was moving along without the assistance of counsel. The developer has since engaged our firm to help them move this project through as legally and ethically as possible. And I think that speaks highly of them and how they want to position themselves in this community. So I would encourage you to not let the dark cloud of the past cloud your judgment regarding this project. Mill Creek is a phenomenal national residential developer and operator. They want to come into this community, be involved in this community, and this won't be some sort of flip deal. They'll continue to be here and to manage this site. Some of the concerns I do want to address and recognize the denial of the Planning Commission are surrounded around this being an industrial zoned area. And comments from the Economic Development Department is preserving industrial land, so that this is something to offer for industries that are looking at Athens. What I will say is this has been an industrial area for 5 years, and in those 5 years, there's still no industry there. We believe that that is attributed to the fact that this land is very challenging when it comes to topography. There are a lot of drop-offs and elevation issues, which present a lot of challenges for industry to select this site. Another thing that has come up tonight from the previous speakers and from the housing summit that Commissioner Thornton orchestrated last Friday is the community needing affordable housing. This developer has since, after meetings with commissioners, after meetings with East Side residents and conversations around the community, has understood that affordable housing is important and has since come up with an opportunity to do affordable housing in this area. I do have paperwork that I'll send around where 10% of these units will be and will provide affordable housing at a 60% AMI, which I believe is incredible for this site. So that's my time.
Thanks, John Nell. And if you have any materials, you can leave those with the attorney.
Okay.
Everyone, is there anyone else who would like to speak to any of
I need to give this card. All
You're
right.
good, Judge. Apologize.
Thank
Is there
you.
anyone else who'd like to speak to any of the planning and zoning items tonight before I relocate so we can have Planning Director Griffin provide presentations on this? All right, I'm going to go ahead and relocate, and we'll fire up the screen. All right.
All right, good evening, everyone. We have 4 items for you tonight from the Planning Commission. First item is 505 515 Olympic Drive. This is a plan development request. Request is to change zoning from employment industrial and industrial with conditions to a mixed-density residential or RM1 plan development. Also to change future land use from employment center to a mixed-density residential. Proposals 254 attached townhome units with gated access, front-loaded garages, and amenities. The site plan itself is virtually identical to the site plan. I mean, there have been a few tweaks, but virtually identical to one recommended for denial in July of '22 by the Planning Commission. And it has since been brought back and is proceeding back through the process as our last speaker just addressed you. You see the site here. This is at the intersection. It's along Olympic Drive at the Loop. Current future land use on the left, which is employment, which is the land use classification that's going to pick up your industrial, your employment industrial, your employment office zoning classifications as appropriate. And this is really the entrance into the Athena Industrial Park as you come off of Loop 10. The change would be to mixed-density residential, as you see on the right, if approved. And then the zoning from EI to RM1 PD. And I say it's identical. If there is a change that has occurred, and it is in part, what we have tried to advise in our staff report in terms of what we deem as concerns with the introduction of this type of residential use. Since the last time this came through the property here, which is zoned heavy industrial, this is a property that has recently been acquired for use by the Utilities Department and the Transit Department for their new facilities. Certainly, the utilities facility went into an industrial zoned area. It's a 24/7 industrial type operation. And so those are the types of uses that certainly have concerns when you start to introduce a residential component in fairly close proximity. But if not them, somebody else. And certainly, that's our primary concern from the staff, and I think from the Planning Commission as well. The site plan is really the same as it was before. So again, some minor changes, but you see the area that works its way across the top, and then down through the middle right is a creek with environmental areas on it that bisects the property. An example of the type of unit that would be built if approved. And the recommendation from the Planning Commission, citing inconsistency with future land use and zoning, isolated future land use and zoning districts. It's really not the design that is close to daily destinations or transit, and then the issues that we've talked about with regard to potential impacts on industrial uses that have located in appropriate locations based on zoning being impacted by the introduction of residential use into an area that was never designed or intended to be residential. So with that, the recommendation to you from the Planning Commission for both land use and zoning is to deny.
Thanks, Brad. And this is now in District 9, Commissioner.
Check on District 9, because there's been a question raised as to whether or not this is still 9 or 3. I am not sure off the top of my head, but I will have an answer before the next meeting.
You can have it.
If it is 3, we apologize and we will correct it, yes.
Commissioner Thornton gladly passes the
You
baton.
can have it. But I will say that I know this is not a voting night, but I think that all developers, I don't know if we have a policy or procedure, but I think we should encourage all developers to look into affordable housing in all of their plans. That's me, and I'm glad to see this developer is rethinking. The other thing, Brad, you said that, I know we've already agreed to the utility part for local government, and I kind of got the feeling that you were saying it's going to be kind of noisy and kind of busy. Did I sense that?
I mean, I think just the inherent operation of a transit facility, maintenance facility, as well as as a public utilities plant, which has got to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is, it's going to run at night, and it's going to make noise, and, I can't speak to how much noise that is, but, hence the reason for trying to identify
So
property
that-
that's
so-
zoned industrial.
So does that new utility plant and the noise, how does that impact the residents that are already over there or not, or it doesn't?
The residents across the railroad,
Yeah, in that whole area. So does the new noise that's going to come, does it impact the residents in that area?
I mean, I think the closest residents are going to be on the south side of Olympic in the
Past the,
off of Nellie B, the large subdivision.
Yeah.
Yes, over there.
Okay.
Certainly a greater distance away
okay, okay,
than this would be.
okay.
And Commissioner, just to kind of hone in on the exact use of that property, it's really envisioned as a dual-use site, the site that we acquired. One of those is the transit maintenance facility, so that's the facility that's currently on Pound Street. And the public utilities component would really be the material storage facility, some of which is not very far from there off Barber Street, where we have to store pipe and the like. So that's not the facility that will be cleaning water or cleaning sewage, but, operating with heavy materials for when we have to do the kind of repairs that, of course, we had a earlier agenda item around. So-
And so my next question, until we figure out whose district this is in, Kelly, you said Pound Street. Wasn't Pound Street, or didn't we start discussing Pound Street for housing?
Yes, so my proposition is that when the transit operation ceases operation on Pound Street, that we utilize that property for
Okay.
affordable housing.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
If I might add that. So, we're going through the transit development plan, and we've had a work session on the funding behind transit, and certainly that's a big capital expenditure to relocate, so that we're going to be having additional conversations about how we can possibly fund that in upcoming.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Tiffany, I'll turn it to you because I think it's actually District 3.
It is in District.
It is in 9. Yeah.
It's in 9?
It's in
That's a
9?
corner. I just opened it up too.
Given that there's nothing on it now, it wouldn't be unusual for you not to identify it as either yours or not yours. But Tiffany, you're very nearby, so if you want to make some comments now, by all means.
I do remember the first time that and I wasn't sworn in, but I do remember when this company came before with the cottages before to build in this same area. But since it's in District 9, I think it'll be respectful to just let Ms. Levita have
Girl,
it.
you're getting too political too fast.
Are there other questions or input from members of the body? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I've got quite a few questions. Are these rental units or condo purchasable units?
Rental.
They're rental, they're all rental. And are the designs for the actual structures set in stone with the binding site plan, or is that just aspirational?
I say that it's not that they could not be sold as condominium, but it's our understanding that this is a rental type product, given the developer. The information that you have in your packet showing the elevations and the designs of those townhomes would be stamp binding, and that's what they would
Yeah.
be asked to build.
I mean, my biggest concern, I'm not necessarily concerned about the industrial impact of the water or the public utilities and bus facility. I live on Boulevard where the bus facility currently is, and honestly, I get more people concerned about, traffic noise on Prince Avenue than anything that goes on at the bus facility, also the railroad noise. This project is right there on the loop, so I feel like that's going to be the biggest noise factor for this community. But then again, people are willing to live and get used to all kinds of conditions. I don't even hear the train anymore myself, but I live 3 blocks from it. We do need affordable housing, but I'd like to see a project that has more diversity in it. I'm all about some townhomes. We certainly need some townhomes in this community. But I'd really like to see a project that feels more like a cohesive, diverse community that would have a multitude of housing options, including townhomes, small cottages, garden apartments, whatever. I mean, this is a large piece of land, and there's a whole lot of possibility to get really creative with it if you were going to change the land use to residential. So that's my biggest concern with it. I just think there's more opportunity to do something a lot better here if it were to go residential. And my personal feeling about the design of the homes, I'd rather see front porches than garages. I feel it's much more conducive to a neighborly neighborhood, and it encourages community when you have that transitional space on front of everybody's house.
Dexter?
And excuse me, I agree with Commissioner Link about having diversity of housing. So my question though, are we ever going to get any type of industry out there? I mean, the land's been sitting and it's, and because of how it's shaped up and everything, do we think we may get any type of industry? I guess that's my question. Do we think we may get any type of industry? And then if not, and if it's available and we can come up with a plan that's going to be conducive for housing, then, I would most definitely support that. But do we feel as a community or as a commission that we're going to see any type of industry out in that particular area anytime soon?
I haven't had any calls immediately on industry, but I think part of our responsibility to you in preparing staff reports is to provide, just like we try to provide protection in our recommendations to existing residential areas from encroachment by something that may be intrusive to the residential, it works the same when you're looking at an industrial area to try to provide that protection to those existing industrial users. While this may not ever be developed as a large plant, There are other uses within the zone that would be certainly less likely to complain or create issues of a new industry seeking to acquire property in an industrial park. One of the very first things they're going to look at is how close am I to residential? Because if they're within a certain distance, they're marking that property off the list. If it's an office park, a research park, a hotel, those types of uses, all of which are also permitted in the current zoning, that's not something that's going to cause them to check a box and make the property go off the list. And so that's part of what we're responsible for giving you for consideration in order to help you make a decision.
Thank you.
Jesse?
Thanks. Yeah, a couple things. I mean, one, to speak to Commissioner Fisher's, point. I guess it's important for us to not look at this tract in isolation. Recognize that there's a lot of industrial kind of north and east of here, and this may well be the last tract that got developed if that fully builds out. But once you start injecting residential into the midst of that, you kind of negate what can happen elsewhere nearby. I think the next agenda item is going to involve similar concerns. But even if we were to look past that concern, I just I was at the Planning Commission meeting for this, and staff referred to this project as nearly identical to what was brought before the Planning Commission before. The Planning Commission gave a lot of feedback, and then proceeded to give a scathing critique of how basically none of that feedback was utilized, and they've been given almost the same thing again, and then from various angles talked about how they hated the design. So, I think if we're to entertain the idea that we might want to change the way this land is used to include residential, we'd probably want to see a design that looked a lot more like the kinds of residential designs that we're looking to see built in our community. And given that it kind of requires itself to be car-centric because it's outside the loop, reconciling with the reality of the traffic that would create along Peter Street and everything too. So, thinking of this as close to anything, it is only true insofar as we think of anything in Athens as close to anything, because we're a pretty small community, but you're going to have to drive. There's no real walking to any commercial amenities, grocery store, anything like that. So, I feel inclined to deny this.
John?
One of the things is there are a lot of jobs around there. Is it close to anything? There's a ton of jobs around there. And that's some of, the thing that people look for when they're looking for a job, or they're looking for a place to live. We've got a new project coming on over on Spring Valley. There's going to be a lot more jobs. And there's a lot of stuff located on Olympic Drive. So that's kind of like the old school, the mill towns, where people lived near where they worked. So, it might be something that we need to look at further down the road, is developing some of this property around these industrial areas where people can get to their jobs. But I think we also need to be careful about requiring, we talk about affordable housing, but the more requirements we put on the developer to make them do things within this project, the more expensive it's going to get, and the more expensive the rent is going to be, or the sale price of the property. So we need to be careful with that.
Carol?
I'm open to looking at pieces of property and developing them differently, but we are going to be doing that as a community with our future land use map pretty shortly. And I know we've gone over this timeline about 100 times, but when are we starting work on that? Because this is part of a broader discussion, how we're going to be developing land, and it's exactly a parcel like this, which might be pulled into that kind of discussion and maybe in the end, this will be what's decided on by the community, but it's a chance for us to reevaluate how we're looking to zone things and have our land developed in the future. When do we start work on that future land use map?
We are prepared to start the growth concept first, and we are already pulling pieces together for that process is starting. Now pending, one of the items tonight is the final. Y'all will make a final determination in May as to whether or not to send forward the comp plan update, the 23 update, which has come back from the state. If there is something that you want sent back and redone on that, then it's going to delay the growth concept map. We're anxious to get the 23 update sent to the state for final adoption, and we're ready to go.
So it's a growth update map.
Growth concept that will lead
concept.
into the future land use map, yes.
And that is mega.
That is a process that will begin basically right now and probably wrap up, according to our work program, in July, August of '24 with the adoption. The growth concept map will come first, but the adoption of the future land use map revision will be next summer.
Which is just over a year from now.
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you so much.
Ovita?
I'm glad that Commissioner Myers brought up about the land use map. It, you know, I'm really hesitant of making major changes in some of our ordinances, knowing that we're coming up, we're starting the land use process. But I know we can't ask the developers to wait until we get a new land use map. But I do think that that's going to be not just for the developers that are presenting tonight, but next month, the month after that, that land use map is really going to slow me down on making a lot of decisions, because I don't even know how you get around that. Have you thought about that, Brad? What do we do with developers and no?
I mean, we cannot put a moratorium for that purpose, in my opinion, or at least it wouldn't be wise to try to put a moratorium to stop submittals for rezoning requests. But I just think they have to be thought through carefully within the next 15 to 16 months as we're in this process.
So if developers really, want to get into the developing of housing, maybe looking at areas that are zone residential, then for us to have to kind of consider making zoning changes.
Zoning changes that would come to you as type 2, where there's not a land use map amendment 2, or first thing that means is that generally what they are asking for is deemed to be compatible with our land use map.
Right.
May not be the same zoning classification, it may allow more density, but it's generally compatible. When
Okay.
you have a land use map, it is wholly incompatible with the current map.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone. Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that I agree with Commissioner Culpepper about the idea of housing and industrial kind of coexisting in a similar area, so people are close to where they work, because that's how communities developed organically since time immemorial. And I kind of feel like when it comes to large projects like this, maybe as we go forward with our future land use plan, maybe we should start to require some commercial on the frontage, the road frontage of these projects. So it does give people a place to go, a neighborhood gathering spot that's commercial that invites, folks outside that immediate community in as well. So I think it's important to look at these large tracts in that respect too. We did have that project out in Newton Bridge Road I felt the same way about.
Tiffany?
I know that the developer presented that it would be affordable. And before we got here, I did think it was District 3. Looked at my map, you're right, it's District 9. But I received phone calls from constituents who are totally against this development, only because it comes, off as affordable, but once it's up and built, the people within the community, they're looking out for their benefit to be able to receive housing, and a lot of them feel like this will not be beneficial for the area of the east side, even though it's District 9. And I'm right there with them. I say we need affordable housing, but we all know affordable housing is a buzzword because it's affordable if you can afford it. A lot of us on this panel can't afford the same house. So what I deem affordable, District 6 or District 7 may not deem as affordable. And so I just want my constituents to know that I spoke on their behalf and they are against this development.
Thanks, Commissioner. I mean, I think there are a lot of good comments tonight. I mean, certainly, at its core, this is a dramatic change in use. And where do we consider a dramatic change in use? I would hope it would come with a very high-quality plan with some offerings to the existing community. I mean, you have to imagine if you're really thinking about integration and knowing that this is near lots of employment, you might hope for a small grocery store up front, for example, that might serve existing folks, or greater variety of housing styles. So, I could certainly see some residential here down the road, once we've done more analysis, that obviously we're poised to do. And so, hope somebody does come back and continues to contemplate this, but with a higher quality plan in place.
And if I could just leave one more point for clarification purposes. The application that you have in front of you that's been forwarded to you from the Planning Commission does not contain any affordable housing. So you've heard that tonight, and that very well may be the case, but an applicant cannot revise their application after it leaves the Planning Commission with a recommendation unless it is attached to a commission-defined option. So if you want that level of affordability to be a requirement, it's going to have to be sponsored by one of you in the form of a CDO, and you're going to need to make sure that it is, because I've not seen this yet. I don't know what they're offering, or other than what I was just told, and I certainly have no reason to believe they're not offering, but one of you would have to sponsor it as a CDO.
Okay.
Jesse?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Brad, can you clarify, this is currently zoned EI and I with conditions. What are the industrial uses that would be allowed in this and other adjacent properties? Like just some examples of industrial uses.
The industrial with conditions is a small piece. It's really along that northern driveway entrance that was acquired from an adjacent property owner, and it's minimal. The condition related to access years ago. It would not allow heavy manufacturing. So in heavy manufacturing, meaning bringing in raw materials and turning them into product. What would be allowed here would be very much what you see through the majority of the Athena Industrial Park in terms of, the research and, the Johnson & Johnsons, the Naramcos, those are deemed light industrial.
But the adjacent lots that are zoned I do allow that heavy industrial
The
use.
adjacent lots that are zoned I, you could do pulpwood, you could do asphalt plants, you could do things like that. In EI, it is a lighter level. You could do hotel, you could do research park, office, medical, those types of things would be permitted to.
Thanks. I think one more thought I just want to share on this kind of topic of housing being near industrial areas and imagining sort of a bygone era when there were mill neighborhoods and things. There are also far less environmental regulations, and lots of people dealt with toxic soils and toxic water and stuff as a result of living so close to where they worked. And part of why I don't think we see as much of that these days is because we have better regulations that ensure people's well-being. And this particular lot being zone EI is right next to lots where we have the heaviest industrial uses being contemplated as being allowed. And so, before we preclude the entire area from having those heavy industrial uses by approving residential use here, I think we really would do well to get through that process of helicopter view, looking at our land as a county as a whole, because this is the area that we think of as the industrial area. And the other one that was contemplated, which happens to be in my district and we'll be talking about next, has had enough residential built in it that no industrial's coming. So, if we start putting residential here, we may well be negating the idea of any industrial coming anywhere within the bounds of Athens-Clarke County. Besides the places that already have it, and already have it literally built. And so I really want to caution against the potential domino effect and the reality of whether housing can practically, in this day and age, be built so close to heavy industrial use.
I have one more quick question.
Real quick.
Yeah, before I left the commission in December, I emailed planning to ask if we had a count, like a bedroom count of how many new bedrooms had been approved, say, in the past 5 years. So we have an idea of how much housing, because there's a lot that we've approved in the past couple of years that has not been built yet. We have all this stuff coming to North Downtown and to behind the Classic Center. So I think we need a good idea of how much housing is actually kind of already in the bag. So we have an idea of, as we face our future land use plan, how much land use we want to change to residential and how much upzoning we really need to do to accommodate the projected population growth.
And building inspections keeps the kind of list of permits, and we can certainly get that for folks.
Yeah,
I
it would
think
be
that's
helpful
to know.
if we could all see that information. I haven't seen it. I think I emailed them on like New Year's Day or something, which is probably my fault.
All right, second one is Classic Road.
Okay. 286, 290, and 296 Classic Road. This is a rezoning from employment industrial to RM2. This is not a planned development, but it is presented to you from the applicant, as Mr. Pittman mentioned earlier, with a binding plan that they have committed to, if approved that way. It's future land use change from general business and employment center to mixed density residential. And then the proposed use is 86 three-bedroom townhomes that are multifamily for rent type product, some rear and some front-loaded garages, a clubhouse and green space, and then appropriate stormwater and conserved canopy areas on site. You see the property here in red, the 3 parcels put together. There is an access entrance off of Jenningsville Parkway on the northwest corner, and then another entrance coming in off of Classic Road, which is the road that you see as part of the subdivision development immediately to the right. Future land use, the frontage of the Jenningsville Parkway identified as commercial uses, with the purple below it as those employment uses, similar to the item that we've just talked about. When the Jenningsville Corners subdivision was put in, which is the subdivision most impacted by this rezoning request, it was during a time that property zoned commercial general could by right do residential single-family development without a special use permit. And this honestly was one of the larger ones that got in, went through the process, but is what ultimately led to the mayor and commission adopting a text amendment so as to not allow this type of residential development within our heavier commercial areas. You see the zoning there, it's CG. It was built by right. They were absolutely within their right to build this development when it was built. But now the impacts potentially are there. You see existing zoning on the left, proposed zoning on the right to RM2. And then if we pull out a little bit in terms of overall future land use in the area, this has not been updated to show a recent rezoning that took place right in here. This was the last one that was approved on the north side of Jenningsville Parkway. Those were the individual small cottages and duplex units up there. I think the other thing to point out with this development is that while Jenningsville Corners is a subdivision is certainly concerned with what may develop to the west, the property that you see there that is red, that is between the houses and Jenningsville Parkway, is commercial general zone property that could be sold and developed, at both entrances to their development too. So rezoning this property to remove any commercial uses does not wholly provide protection to that neighborhood, as the piece immediately north of them could also be developed for commercial purposes. Here's the proposed design, townhouses. What you're seeing here are alley loaded. The run of units across the very top of the plan have front doors facing Jenningsville Parkway with pedestrian access with rear-loaded garages. The units immediately below those are kind of a flip version of the same thing, and those front doors face, I believe, to the south out onto a common pedestrian that overlook the green space, but all of those units then load from an alley between them. The next run of units below the green space face the private drive entry, and this is the piece of the road that the condition is calling for. Instead of it being basically a private driveway designed to road standards, we have asked for consideration to actually have that as a dedicated public road that connects from Classic Road within the subdivision all the way across and connects to the adjacent property to the west. And I think the thinking and staff was the one that put this in front of the Planning Commission as a condition for consideration if they chose to recommend approval. I mean, we think there's a very real possibility down the road that that EI property west of this may redevelop in some more of a commercial neighborhood scale, maybe a mixed-use manner. And if it does, and you live here, in order to get to that, you would have to go onto the parkway and go down and U-turn and come back and U-turn again to get into it. If a road connection would allow you to walk, bike, or ride your car, drive your car into the adjacent development. I think it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that if we did have some type of an employment industrial development that went onto the adjacent property, that they would choose to utilize that road to go across to another neighborhood to get out when they've got direct access. But certainly if I was a neighbor living in that subdivision, I understand their concerns of that. But that's the thinking on the public road, is long-term connectivity. There was originally, down at the very bottom right corner where you see the sewer line come in, when Jenningsville Corners was developed, that was a proposed road stub that was intended to connect over to this development to build that grid system. That stub was never dedicated. It has subsequently been acquired by a private property owner, and so is really not available. It's either the property owner or the HOA, but they have no interest in allowing for that to be developed as a public road in from the rear as it was originally intended, hence the road that's a little bit further up. The design of the townhouses you see here, Planning Commission recommend something a little different than what staff recommended. They are recommending that the future land use be approved. They do choose to recommend rezoning of the property with the conditions, and they didn't include all of our conditions, but the things that they're asking for you to consider as conditions of an approval would be to remove the binding aspect of the plan. And this is largely, there are still issues in there, and Mr. Pittman indicated some of them. The alleys need, some of these townhouses are only served by an alley in terms of fire access. Alleys are normally secondary means, and you have a public street on the other side of the unit that the fire truck can much more easily navigate. There are some units in here that are only served one side by an alley. That's why the fire marshal had requested them to move. When you start taking all the alleys from 16 to 20 feet, it's kind of dominoes and everything starts moving a little. The binding plan kind of goes away at that point in terms of, we don't know how much that would require to be changed. And so we wanted to build that flexibility into the developer as a condition that if it's approved, they remove the binding nature, do the public street from east to west. There are some substandard parking spaces. Some of the driveways need to stretch just a little bit to provide the 2 spaces, and then the adequate backup space. And some of this very well may be picked up when the alley widths are widened in order to address fire department concerns too. But all of those require plan changes. Planning Commission felt it was appropriate to approve the rezoning, but did want to add those 4 conditions. The 5th condition that we had requested consideration of was to reduce or require the height of retaining walls within a development to be no more than 4 feet without having a step back. There are some fairly large walls due to topography on this project, and that's included in your packet. They did not see that appropriate as a condition and did not include it in their recommendation. So that is the recommendation from PC, is to approve with 4 conditions.
All right, and this is with certainty in District 6.
Certainly is. Boy, we have all inherited this mess. I'm hesitant to make an ad hoc decision on this corridor. Essentially spot zoning one area without getting through the future land use map update and the growth concept map update that we've been talking about. The future land use as contemplated in this, to me, makes sense. I mean, if you look at what's happening on that corridor, there's been so much residential built in spite of what was initially laid out infrastructurally that industrial is not going to happen here. I think, as one of the speakers pointed out, and our economic development department seems to agree from everything I've heard, we don't anticipate employment industrial coming to this area. And so a lot of what I think has the neighborhood inclined to support this or the previous version that was coming never quite made it to us. this is like the third version since I've been on the commission that's been brought forward by somebody for this area, is that they don't want to, they're worried about like an industrial use being immediately adjacent, or even a commercial use. But I appreciate, as Brad pointed out, their neighborhood is actually zoned commercial. I mean, if it weren't for the HOA covenants, someone could literally turn one of their houses into a McDonald's within the neighborhood. But certainly the what's currently trees immediately north of the neighborhood at the entrance roads to their neighborhood can by right be turned into all kinds of commercial things. And so when we're thinking about what could go in there and whether it'll still include commercial or some kind of employment, some kind of mixed use, I think we need a future land use map, a growth concept map that matches that, so that what is built can be built, whether it comes before us or not, whether it's by right or not, in a way that makes sense with all the adjacent neighborhoods. So, my current thinking, and I intend to reach out to the applicant to get their thoughts on, further hear them out on this. My current feeling on this is that the future land use change makes sense as kind of a signal for what should be happening on that corridor. But in terms of what actually goes in there, I can't see approving this rezone as is. I'd like to take just a minute to maybe enumerate a few of the reasons why. RM2, I think, could make sense here as a zoning category, but the design of this, I think, has some flaws, and Brad went through some of them. But the only way to really make this work in the way that the Planning Commission recommends it is to remove the binding site plan. And so then we basically open this up to be whatever. And the topography is difficult. The applicant was obviously willing to bring a binding site plan, and I think if we were to move forward with something that was some kind of a spot zone, I would think we would need a binding site plan that made more sense. Of course, we also have to think about when we're thinking about what's going to go in this whole corridor, that road, Jennings Mill Parkway, is a 4-lane median separated road that was designed for truck traffic originally. You can't call something missing middle housing when the definition as our plan that we adopted clarifies of missing middle is that it's in a walkable area. I mean, you can't walk to anything here, And then furthermore, the way this current design looks, I mean, the roads within this development don't connect to any adjacent neighborhood. So you can't even walk to the adjacent neighborhood that does exist or one that could exist in the future. I mean, it's kind of a design that sort of is a gated community without the gates. And, I think we need to remember that the roads that run through that adjacent neighborhood are public streets. And so maybe that connection can't be, to my chagrin, made where it was, I think, initially complicated at that stub. But certainly, if we're going to build residential next to residential on public streets, I would hope that we were doing it in a way where people can walk to their neighbor's house and not have to drive out to a 4-lane highway and take 3 lefts across it, to get into another neighborhood. The alley off the alley, which staff at the Planning Commission meeting talked about being, unusual. In addition to fire concerns, just again, if we're thinking of design, if we're thinking of car centrism, even if there was a way with this being made non-binding for them to do something similar and widen those, I'm just not convinced that you end up with a neighborhood that matches anything that we're trying to get built. I also have a lot of concerns about the tree canopy as proposed comes in under what our ordinance calls for. So we're essentially, waiving what would be required under this zoning category. And where they're placed and where it's conserved doesn't provide any shade anywhere within the neighborhood except along the one road that's intended for cars. All that to say, as a signal to both the neighborhood and the applicant that I think it makes sense to move in a direction, broadly speaking, that looks like residential and RM2. I think we kind of need to go back to the drawing board on what specifically comes with this rezone request. Thanks.
Melissa.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Houle is spot on in his very thorough list of things that could be vastly improved with this project where, residential certainly makes sense, but this just doesn't seem to hit it. I'm also concerned with the lack of attention to Jennings Mill frontage. This is an opportunity to get a small segment of mixed-use path or something. This is certainly a corridor that's developing residentially Yeah, like Jesse said, there's no way to get anywhere other than getting in your car, and it's very close to a whole lot of commercial opportunities, but you're not going to go there unless you're in your car. So yeah, as we develop the future land use plan, this is another corridor where we really need to understand the value of mixed use, and the value of encouraging these cohesive neighborhoods that are actual neighborhoods where people can live and easily get to the services and the employment that they need. I don't have a problem with the idea of commercial general, at an entrance to a neighborhood. That neighborhood adjacent to me kind of makes sense. And maybe that's the kind of rezoning and land use planning changes that we should make to our code. Whereas if you're going to develop a large subdivision like this, there might be some kind of commercial requirement on, if it's on a corridor that is, conducive to that. So, and where that commercial could serve all these other residents. So, yeah, I certainly agree with everything Jesse says.
Kavita?
I know that we have this concept that everything should be walkable, and maybe that's the goal. I never, ever remember us actually saying that. I know there's been a few that felt that way, and I know that all neighborhoods are not walkable. All neighborhoods are not, you can go right to a store, and I think we should be mindful of that when developers come to us. Yes, we would like to be walkable, but you know what? I can't walk nowhere in my neighborhood, when you come out the far north Athens. And it sounds good, but I'm struggling because we should be looking for diversity. Some areas are walkable, some areas are out and separate. But it looks like a couple of us really want to push our vision of what a community looks like. I do think that those are the kind of things that our land use process should develop. And I think that's where we should be having input in what we want collectively. And some people, they want to get out. They don't want to be next to nobody. They don't want nobody walking in their yard and looking in their window. They don't want those paths. And I think that we should be mindful of that and look for diversity in all of our communities. And I look forward to our input with the land use map.
Carol?
Yeah, I have some specific questions. I did listen to the Planning Commission meeting, but I focus on the fact that I listened to it, so I was not looking at anything. So if Brad could help me a little bit here. If we look to that plan, I think it's on page 124, there are a couple of things I wanted to ask about here. And that is, there is a lot of discussion about this huge retaining wall, and the image that sticks in my head that someone from the planning department, I believe, made was that it's as large as the wall. Oh, this is Patrick will like this because he likes this, Commissioner Davenport. This wall, he has images of the wall at the intersection by the B&B Theaters at the bottom of Barnett Shoals when it comes into Lexington. And I think there was, someone said that retaining wall is going to be that, comparative to that one. Can you show me where that actually is?
I believe the wall that Max was referring to, this is the green space, and you
Yeah.
see it is wrapped completely across the top, down the right, and then back around the bottom with a retaining wall. Now, that wall, when you get to the far left-hand side, is only about 3 feet high. But in order for that community center and the green space behind it to be flat, and the property is moving up the hill as it's going towards the adjacent neighborhood, when you get into the corner on the right-hand side, adjacent to the street, that wall is about 15 feet tall, and it is down off the road. So you would have road, sidewalk, street trees, and then you're going to have a fence on top of a wall that drops down about 15 feet.
So right where it says community garden,
Right, if I can do it, right in this area is where we're talking
where,
about.
yeah, that's where so.
Really tall, 10 feet-ish in here, dropping down from the townhomes that sit up over it onto the green space. And as it moves west, it catches grade and it gets shorter.
So that might be trouble for the community garden, because that'd be getting the northern, it's facing north, but, and that's in there. But in the alleys, when we're looking at this picture, if you go down to the alley that connects to the alley along here, those are reminding me to some degree of over in Whitehall, the Whitehall, I don't know what we call those, the condos, townhouses. There's a lot of alleys there in the back. But those buildings that are on the bottom part, the front, those would have garage, carports or garages right there onto the alley, right? And I
Yes.
imagine the front door would be there, but there's no like walking paths or anything out around for the people to like walk out on the front doors there. So that, I'm just trying to understand what we're seeing visually in front of us here.
I think that's correct. Those units will have a door garage combination, I would assume, facing the alley.
Right, so they'd be door to garage back there, in there.
And I think part of the concern, and certainly that was one of the primary areas of concern with fire marshal, as well as the alley that it connects to, for the units on the south side of it, is that, if garage becomes storage, driveway becomes car parking on both sides, and then if there is a need to get an emergency vehicle down that
Yeah.
alley, it gets very tight very quick. And that's why the request was to push out to provide more room.
Yeah, I know in the Whitehall ones that are similar to this, there's a lot of paths and sidewalks, so people do have a place, not necessarily walking to a convenience store, but to walk in community, walking pets and children on tricycles kind of thing. And I'm not sure if I see that here very much. Do I? Am I missing something?
I don't think as much. I think if you're talking about the original phase one of the Whitehall,
Yeah,
the white buildings on Whitehall Road on the east side, left-hand side if you're going towards Oconee.
yeah.
That was that first phase, the buildings are all white. Those are all fee simple townhouses, done as a subdivision. All of those townhomes should, with maybe exception of just a few in the edges, they're all served by alleys, but they all also have a front door access to a public street.
Right.
On the front with
Right.
a sidewalk, and so you load from both sides. Totally eliminates the fire department concern, because
Right.
they will use the public street to serve those buildings.
And also creates a little bit sense of community
Yes.
there. Okay, thank you.
Mike?
Sure, thank you. And I'm just looking at the plan and looking at, and listening to the conversation and looking at what's there already as far as infrastructure goes for walkability. Jennings Mill Parkway already has a sidewalk for the most part, on both sides of the road. Classic Road, according to this plan, they're gonna connect the sidewalk to the existing homes that are back there behind Classic Road. Jennings Mill Parkway also has bike lanes on both sides for a good portion of the street. So, the infrastructure's there, and, I know I would certainly like to see protected bike lanes and multi-use paths, but the infrastructure's there, and I would say this, it's there so that when we do utilize the Atlanta Highway T-SPLOST dollars, that we're able to connect folks that are living in areas like this to be able to walk to amenities and such as that. I mean, with this one, you go right down Classic Road and the hotel's right there, and then you're right on Atlanta Highway. So I think we ought to just think about this and think about this area, as we have learned, is an area ripe for people who may work elsewhere out of town, who may travel to Atlanta, and the west side is part of, as we learned from the economic development, a couple of years ago, I don't remember the folks' name that presented to us, talked about this area being ripe for housing development. And so I don't think we ought to totally dismiss what we're looking at here. Sure, it could be, I don't know, the design could be a bit better, but I don't, but we can see where we can go with that. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Jesse?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, agreeing the design could, if we agree that the design could be better, I think there's no way to get the design better without it having to go back through the planning commission process again, because if it's going to be a binding site plan, it needs to be reviewed by everybody. I think I started off by saying we all inherited this mess, but what I meant by that is, we, the community, we, the commission, the developer, the applicant here, the neighborhood immediately adjacent, and everyone else along that corridor, has inherited a series of decisions and, by this body, but then subsequent unanticipated development that's happened on this corridor that's just incompatible. And I think we need to holistically reimagine what happens here for the benefit of everyone before we start, taking off more bites. The commercial general that's immediately adjacent, for example, maybe commercial neighborhood would make more sense as a designation, which would align with the future land use, but would also probably be more palatable in terms of what it does and does not allow for neighbors. One thing I want to highlight too is sewer, which is in the report, but we had staff from Public Utilities show up, and this is I think fairly new for us, but I think a good direction for us to be going when we get these reports from staff, that they're looking helicopter view at the community and not just taking things lot by lot. I know we've asked about that in some past meetings here. And they said, I wrote this down as a quote, "The sewer line is nearing its total capacity limit. Approval of this project could limit by right development throughout the basin." The basin being a third of our county. So, when we're talking about turning industrial land use into very dense housing, if that's going to happen here and elsewhere, there's the roads we need to think about, but there's also the pipes under the ground and the ability for those pipes to do what they're designed to do effectively. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. I just think it means that we, as a community, need to be ahead of that with a plan for how to fund it, how to get that in the ground, how to get that built out. There's sidewalk along Jennings Mill, but you can pull up Google Maps and look at it. Certainly, I would encourage people to go out there and drive it or try to walk it. No one's safely crossing that road without some dramatic improvements to the intersection at Jennings Mill Parkway. So, you can walk from the neighborhood along the highway, but you can't safely get across it without us doing some major things to that. And I think for us to, responsibly add more residential to a road that was designed for truck traffic and high-speed car traffic, we need to think about what we're going to invest in redesigning this road to be safe to cross, because ultimately an individual developer, may not be generating enough development on their site alone to justify the level of infrastructural change that would have to happen at that intersection or on that road. And then, a colleague raised up, Commissioner Thornton raised up, about how we haven't talked about things being walkable, but I'd just like to point out, we adopted a missing middle housing study that talks all about walkability, and, one of the people representing the applicant tonight referenced the Complete Streets policy that we've adopted, and the Athens in Motion plan, and the Athens in Motion Commission that we have are all about walkability. Language built into our TAD with the adjacent mall development, and everything that we discussed around the redevelopment of the mall for the last 2 years was all about walkability. Our comprehensive plan underscores all of this, and we just adopted the update to that. So I do feel like we very formally, repeatedly have emphasized the need for safe, walkable neighborhoods. To that end, if there's something I hear about from District 6 residents as much or more than anything else, it's how terrible traffic is on Atlanta Highway and how worried they are about how it's going to get worse. And if we develop in a way that prohibits people from going anywhere in any way besides using their car, that problem is guaranteed to only get worse. So, I think it's in the best interest of everyone to provide safe options for travel in order to develop in a way where people can exercise those options and stay alive doing it. Thanks.
Melissa?
Yeah, on the note of walkability, pulling out on Google Maps, you notice there's things like Athens Sports Arena and Athens Skate-In within like what appears to be about a half a mile of this. There are certainly amenities out there that you could see a family moving into one of these units and their kids wanting to be able to walk to something like that or to get a job at the Bojangles that's on Atlanta Highway. So I think it is important to consider walkability within the neighborhood, because if you can't walk around your neighborhood to even get to the sidewalk on Jennings Mill Parkway, are you even gonna bother walking? And, you know, I think that, you know, people would see a project like this as attractive because of all these commercial amenities around. Yet it doesn't matter if they're near them, if they still have to drive to them. So yeah, I really think as we see corridors like this develop with more and more residential, we need to focus on assuring that the folks that live there can easily get to those amenities. And, you know, I see a corridor like this developing the way like maybe Prince Avenue did or Hawthorne Avenue, although I've long said that Hawthorne should be downgraded to commercial neighborhood rather than commercial general zoning, or West Broad as well, where you do have commercial businesses that serve the immediate communities, accessible from those immediate communities, where there's often very little need for folks to get in their car and drive onto those major roads.
Vita.
I need to clarify this. I really think that I'm being misunderstood when I said about we didn't talk. Maybe I'm saying that common sense tells us that we write stuff in and we try to follow it. But there's sometimes something different, you know, that you don't even think, it just happens. Just because we want everything to be walkable, it's not going to happen that way. That's all I'm saying. So I'm not knocking that. I wish we would have talked about that more with the Lexington project, for example. That to me, you know, we can't say one thing about a project and then we change up. I don't feel good about the Oglethorpe project, even though it's walkable. But I don't know where you're walking to. I mean, in the neighborhood, but not like major stores and stuff. And you got to drive until. So I'm saying. So I don't want to be disagreeable. I'm just saying. Sometimes when you write something, it doesn't mean like it's just going to roll out the way you write it. You're going to have some places you're going to have to drive, and there's some people who want to drive. And I think that this is one of the problems I saw before. We say one thing and think that is it. We can't just erase out everything else because we have a vision of what it should look, what we want things to look like. So please do not misunderstand me. I think being able to walk is good. That may be the way the future is. Everybody's not a biker. Everybody's not. It's not that way, and that's all I'm saying. So no, I think all the points that I've heard today are good. I think that the developers heard some conversation too that probably is helpful, but we cannot do one thing that fits every situation. That was my only point.
All right, we have one more site-specific plan. We'll go ahead and take a look at Prince Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. A little more straightforward than the last two. 595 Prince Avenue is a straight rezoning request from institutional to commercial office and mixed density RM1. This is the property recently purchased by the school district, and they are requesting to rezone 2 existing buildings on the parcel in preparation for subdivision and sale. The rezoning request matches adjacent zoning and no new construction is proposed. This is a straight zoning. Property was put into an institutional zoning classification, I believe, with Piedmont, when Piedmont was in there, and it has since been acquired by the school district. The 2 houses on the east end of the property that you see, and I'll show you a picture of each one of them in a minute, that you see kind of sectioned off with the separate red line, those are the two that are currently part of the overall institutional parcel that they would like to subdivide into 2 existing lots, each one containing a house, rezone them to zoning that's compatible to the east, and then put them up for sale. Institutional to institutional, and then the land use change you see there for zoning. This is the Prince Avenue frontage. That is the rear frontage. It's consistent with future land use and adjacent zoning. It's consistent with our comp plan. It does provide an opportunity to reuse historic structures for residential and commercial purposes. School district has made it really clear that their long-term plans don't have a place for these 2 properties, and they think they would be better placed back on the tax rolls and sold and in zone compatible with their neighbors to the east. And so the Planning Commission recommendation is to approve.
All right, this is in District 4.
Yeah,
These
yes,
days.
it is. I was impressed with the school district's considerations of these 2 as potential staff, teacher, housing. They really looked at a lot of different things for it, but ultimately came up with this idea, and I think it's quite compatible. Actually, this rezone, to me, makes them more compatible with the neighbor houses that are there. I think that it'll be welcomed into that historic district, I would imagine, and give some deserved love and be a residential home for somebody.
Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, this was my district for 8 years. I've had some communication with some of the homeowners in the immediate area about this. They might have some concerns about the RM2 density because there are a lot of problems in that neighborhood with, students occupying these houses and, parties, parking issues. From what I understand, the surrounding properties are RM1, right?
I don't think so.
Or is it all RM2?
It's RM2 on the
On
north
that
side.
side?
Yes.
And then RM1 on the other
the
side?
south side,
Okay.
yes.
So they're going to end up matching what's
Yeah.
next to them.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm wondering how many bedrooms are in that Hill Street facing house, and if there's adequate parking to meet the needs of what would inevitably be student housing. And how many bedrooms could they get out of it if they were to bust into the attic and add more? Is it in the historic district? Is it protected from demolition? No, so they could knock it down and put up a multi-story structure. And
Well, that was a question raised by some of the planning commissioners too. And I think if you've got a level of protection there from demolition, it is probably the highest and best use of what you're ever going to get on a lot that size is what's already sitting there. I think
It's RM2.
I think if you take it down to the ground, then you're now subject to RM2 lot coverage, meeting all RM2 standards. I think you're not going.
RM2 is 25 bedrooms per acre.
24 beds an acre, but you
24.
can only cover about 60% of your lot, and it's,
Parking requirements would kick in.
Yeah.
and this will be a change of use.
And that's the thing,
so-
the parking requirements don't kick in, and I think the major concern would be, what if you do pack 4 or 5 students into this house, where do those 4 or 5 cars go, plus all their friends that might come and visit and want to park on the street when they all stumble downtown every other night?
It's my understanding this property has been used in the past for office institutional type use.
Yeah.
To put it back to a residential use means it's a change of use. So it gets evaluated for residential density in RM2 based on the size of the lot. Therefore, they can have X number of bedrooms. I mean, parking, you're right, parking, but we fight that battle both ways.
It's the biggest concern of folks in these in-town
But at the
neighborhoods.
same time, we look at missing middle housing, and one of the big pushes on missing middle is you shouldn't have all this parking.
I agree,
And
but
so-
you students have cars. If we were in like a
I
different
agree.
town, it would be a different situation.
So that's, yes, but it is not in the district.
Yeah, I'll have some conversations with these folks and loop Allison in, and get a better understanding of, exactly how many bedrooms could be allowed there if that house were to be demolished. What would be built, because doesn't have historic protections, and crunch some numbers on, what happens if it does flip hands and become something else.
Sure, thank you. Just a little bit tidbit. I used to clean the building there on Prince Avenue. It was a very loved building, by the way, Alice, Commissioner Wright, and it's a nice building, too. And then the Prince, or Piedmont utilized that other building on Hill Street as their bookstore. So it's not that big of a building, really.
Yeah.
About 2,500 square feet.
Yeah.
That's why I wonder if there'd be better, someone would get the idea to just demolish it and,
Well, I hope not. I mean, I would hope somebody
well, hope is a
would maybe. Yeah.
aspirational concept these days.
Dexter?
Yeah, having been involved with the purchase of 595 Prince Avenue, I'm very familiar with those two structures that are on that campus. Like Commissioner Hammond said, one was a bookstore, and then Piedmont used the other part as entertainment. The president would use that. So it was never talked about demolishing any of those structures at all. It was always planned to either hope somebody would buy those two structures and then renovate them, possibly for housing moving forward. So,
Ovita?
I serve on East SPLOST, and they've talked about these two structures, and they really didn't talk about demolishing. They talked about renovation or moving the structures. I don't think we can assume just because we change it that it would be demolished, but I guess everybody will do their homework before next month, but I did not hear a conversation about actually demolishing.
Allison?
Yeah, and one of my criteria consistently, when a demo permit comes in my district, I have them wait, hoping to move it. I've had 3 houses moved of smaller nature than these, but I would think that this would be, if it came to a demo permit on either of those, I think that there would be the call for having them added to or addressing why they weren't included in the historic district, similar to what was done on Rutherford, Castalia as well. But we do have those options to back us up if that were to come about, that somebody wanted them. But Melissa, we'll get together and talk about what can't go in there to help. And then this area too, we're talking about getting residential parking passes and designation on these streets to help with the, keep the parking in check.
My guess is that the adjacent historic district probably was put in place when this was actually the Prince Avenue Baptist Church campus with the school. So that's probably why it wasn't included. And maybe some future amendment to the boundaries of that historic district might be in order. Brad, that Hill Street property, what's that, 1/10 of an acre, something in that ballpark?
It is .176 on the lower side. It's going to give you a 4-bedroom house.
Okay, yeah, so that was,
And then, just let me ask another question. Is adding this to the historic district something that we could do as a body before it got, no, okay.
I mean, a boundary expansion to historic district means you reevaluate the entire district. You open up the whole thing for reconsideration. It's a full designation process.
Yeah, and then when that was done for downtown, that's where we ended up with 2 different ones, because instead of adding it to the first one, it ended up with the second one.
That's why we have seen some other districts that are adjacent to districts already in place, but instead chose to do their separate local historic districts so as to not open up the whole district boundary again for
And that-
reconsideration.
Gotcha. Well, that helps explain why I have 7 in my new district. Because instead of making one larger, it's easier just to go ahead and give it its
Yes.
new name. Okay, thank you.
just kind of one note, just given the market value of property, this is in the Chase Elementary Zone, so there's kind of a large magnetism there. There have been some properties converted from institutional use to family use on the block, so just across the street and down, a family's moving in. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was interest in that here. Obviously, that's speculative, we don't know.
And if even if we had even considered historic designation, the repairs, I understand, are already astronomical. So if we even considered something like that, what would the cost look like in the long run?
It would be whatever somebody was willing to spend.
Okay.
All right, we ready to go on to the comp plan?
Yes, just a report to you on our progress with the 23 comprehensive plan update. We presented that to you prior to sending it to the state for their review a couple of months ago. It was only with the state for about 3 or 3.5 weeks. It was returned to us with no requested revisions or corrections. They had a couple of comments for 28 plan, which we agree with, and we've already been talking about them, but their recommendation back to us was it is in a position to present back to you for a vote to forward for final adoption, which really then clears the way for us to go full bore on our growth concept map. So that's what we will be asking for your consideration at your May meeting, is to vote to send it to the state for final adoption.
All right, any questions about that?
Sounds good.
All right, seeing none, thank you, Brad, very
you.
much. Hope you have a great night, and I'm going to relocate again, and we'll at least get through consent agenda before we take a break. All right. Did want to ask, we've right now only got 2 items on the consent agenda. Would any commissioner like to remove either 5 or 6 from the consent agenda? Please say no.
That might be the smallest consent.
Be kind of good just to remove, never mind.
Please tell me.
I think it would be funny if we removed both of them, but I'm not going to do that. So.
Lots of humor goes on in this room. All right, is there any member of the public who would like to speak to either item or either item 5 or 6 currently on the consent agenda? All right, let's move on. We've got old and new business next. Those are items 7 through 17. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to any of those 7 through 17? Very quiet in City Hall tonight. All right, we have old business item number 7. Of course, this was a planning and zoning item held over from last month, and this is in District 9. And any update, Commissioner Thornton, or would you just like to wait for discussion to the voting meeting?
I don't have any new information. I just text Ms. Hogan because she was waiting for some information from TPW. According to her, she's still waiting for the exhibits. He agreed to some of the revisions and said he would email confirming. So I assume we'll have them before by the voting meeting.
Okay. And definitely, I would encourage her to get those as soon as possible. That way commissioners and the public have an opportunity to lay eyes on those. Any other input on 7? All right, 8 really is in conjunction with it. That's the pump station that would serve the site. Anything on that? All right. Moving on to 9, this is the HRC recommendation recognizing Pride Month and Juneteenth. We've just got dates on the calendar for those flags.
Yeah,
Wright?
I think that there's some committee meetings that are happening this week with HRC. Would that get updated if they, we'll just have that update when it's available. Is that right, Nikki?
It's not the flag. We suspect that will stay as recommended right now.
Yeah, that's more about community activities. This is about the flag that's on your agenda here. This is about when the flag will fly.
It
Well, there's
is,
2
isn't
things,
it? Right, this is sharing the flag pole.
Yep.
Is this something that could go consent? I mean,
It is something that could go to
Yeah.
consent. Would folks like to see this on consent?
Grow that consent agenda.
Lovely.
Just a quick question, happy with it on consent. Are the resolutions basically just the same as last year?
Similar, just with the dates specified.
Okay.
Things that we missed last year.
Okay.
All right, 9 is on consent. 10 is the HRC recommendation to approve the annual work plan. Melissa?
Yeah, I'd like to take that off, or make sure it stays off consent, to have some conversation with staff and possibly the mayor about how the HRC might be involved in addressing discrimination complaints against folks who might have some role in the government, some appointed role in the local government. So I'd really like to get some answers, some clear answers on how a procedure to launch a complaint might reach this body, which, we've designated to address such complaints.
And it might be helpful if you send that in email, maybe direct it to the county attorney and
will.
copy everyone. That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah, if
Yes.
I might, real quick, Mayor, just so, before we create any confusion.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I looked at the ordinance, but the process for receiving complaints under our non-discrimination ordinance does not go to an advisory body, but rather to the attorney's office.
Okay.
I don't think that, and that's another thing we can talk more about, and I'm going to share some stuff with you. How boards, authorities, and commissions remain advisory, which is their nature, except for elections, of course, because statutorily they have some things. But having BACs start to get involved in operations is problematic and something we really should discuss. But right now, the ordinance, I think, points towards the attorney's office as a
Okay, I'd just
receipt.
like to get some clarity on what that particular procedure might be, because I feel like we appointed this body to advise this commission on general, human rights issues, human relations issues, and yet this body appoints people to other bodies, and if they're, I don't know, I just feel like there needs to be some clarity on how to deal with that issue, because right now there is none. So
Well,
I'll be in touch.
As far as complaints against employees who've allegedly
I'm
discriminated.
not talking about employees.
Oh, okay.
Well, I would just say that, no, Commissioner Link, totally understand. They're an advisory body. I don't think it was contemplated that they would serve in a quasi-judicial function. And so, we'll share some more
Okay.
clarity with you on that.
But you might articulate that question and kind of provide
Yeah.
a scenario to the attorney in that
Yeah,
email.
I will. I'll
That
write
may be
it out.
helpful.
Yeah.
Dexter?
Yeah, I thought, because they're supposed to be working on their annual plan, so this would be part of their annual plan though, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
So we haven't even got that information yet, because they're, from what I understand, they're supposed to present some possibly in December with the annual plan for things what Commissioner Link is talking about. Is that part of their annual plan?
So as part of the annual plan, that is part of this agenda item, there will be 3 focus areas.
Right,
The
we
non-
talked-
yep, the non-discrimination ordinance being put,
Right.
one of them, community events, and then policy recommendations. What they've done is created some very specific strategies that they want to look at, and then some milestones that they want to achieve. But that's what they have for their annual plan at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
Allison?
Just real quick, Commissioner Link, it could be that what you're wanting to capture will be addressed when the BAC topic is in GOC. Sorry, too many acronyms here, but you know what I'm saying? Because there already is an assignment. And then I found out recently there's some online, to augment our BAC handout, we also are having some online tutorials or lessons that are happening too. So I think once we learn more about those and see whether they need to have additional things to address concerns that may or may not be happening, but I think that's more our side than Human Relations Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like there is some policy to be developed to address those concerns, that this commission should have some input on it, whether it's merely a recommendation or an analysis of a proposed policy, because this is the body that, has been selected to represent a diverse array of the community and particularly include people who might experience some discrimination. I feel like at some point, if there is some policy to bring those kind of complaints forward, this body should have something to do with it, whether it's helping to craft that policy, somewhere along the way that this body should have some input into that kind of process, whether it's just an input on the process itself.
Jesse?
Yeah, this is sort of reiterating what I said at the work session on this, but as far as the policy recommendation portion of this, I just continue to feel like this committee, especially the subcommittee they've additionally created, could be looking at policies to recommend while they also develop whatever this rubric is. Concerns about it taking all the way till December just to have that rubric developed. So if we can get some kind of clarity from staff and/or the chair of the HRC on, why it's going to take till December to talk about what they're going to talk about. At some point, at that point, this group will have existed for almost 2 years. Half of the body will be nearing the completion of their first kind of half term. I'd hope the people that we appointed to this could start working on whatever that low-hanging fruit is, taking one thing at a time while they figure out whatever the ideal policy is to prioritize moving forward.
Commissioner Wolf, that's a good point, and I think the HRCA has contemplated that. They've said that they do want to create a rubric because they want to be thoughtful in what they do, but they've also left room to be flexible on the hottest topic, if you will, to talk about it, to tackle it, to make recommendations on those things.
So, maybe I guess I'd love to see a work plan that either articulated the plan to work on a topic while developing this, or maybe even shared, their idea of what one or two topics are to tackle while they figure out the rubric for generally. I feel like we're leaving a lot of ambiguity for a barely paid, a largely unpaid body to kind of keep swirling around an ambiguous discussion. And, the number one thing built into the ordinance, the first thing listed is recommending policy. At some point, I'd love to have the people we appointed to this begin to give us some policy recommendations. So.
Carol?
Am I missing something? On Focus Area 3, recommend policy, the second point is determines policy recommendations for 2024 based on community input, outreach, and the needs assessment. It does say ongoing, but I would assume that's ongoing every year. So it does imply to me here that there will be recommendations on policy that are put together this coming year.
That's how I understand it.
Okay. So it doesn't say just create a rubric in.
Yeah, I interpreted that to mean after they have the rubric in December, then in 2024, they'll determine which policies to work on.
Where does it say rubric?
That was how it was presented
Okay.
in the work session, I guess, yeah.
Ovita?
No, never mind.
Can I address something?
Dexter?
And I said this our last session, I think, HRC is just not getting it up and running. And I think, we just got an inclusion officer in. So, again, as a body, and I'm saying again, we need to be patient and let them work what they need to work. I hate if they felt like they was pressured to present something and didn't have any type of effect what they're trying to present. So I would say this commission, be patient with what they're trying to put together. Let's see what they're doing. And then once they make a presentation, we'll go from there. But I don't think you can present any particular item that may be a concern. It could be many that are concerned. And for us to ask them to pick one or two, who's to say those one or two are important? So we just need to be careful about pushing them. And then, the work that they're trying to do, and like I say, it's a volunteer. I'm assuming most of those folks work. So we just have to be mindful of what the time that they're putting in. So that's all I'm saying. That just shows some patience.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Fisher, because they are working really hard and meeting quite a bit, and they're trying to work through things right now. And I do expect that, in the future, there will be fruit from this BAC.
All right. Another project that's supported by the Inclusion Office is 11. This is the Athens Justice and Memory Project recommendation to rename the southernmost block of Finley Street between Cloverhurst and Baxter to Linnentown Lane. So, and I know Commissioner Hamby, you're sitting on the board. I'm ex officio.
Yeah, and this, we had a good discussion about this, and I know Ms. Whitehead is excited about this, and it adds some recognition to Linnentown and in a meaningful way. So I think this will be good.
Thank you. Consent? Sure. Okay. All right. 12 is the funding recommendation for the ARPA-funded Eviction Prevention Program. Of course, this is sort of the reboot of that in a way that Family Promise has been interested in pursuing. Input on that?
Please pull it.
It's not on consent.
Oh, okay, because I'm not voting for it. Just want you to know.
12, want to put on consent?
I think I need to read through it a little bit more. It was a heavy
Okay.
heavy
Yeah,
agenda
not ready
item.
yet.
I said, pull it.
Staying off
We're off
consent.
it.
yeah.
All right, we'll leave it off consent. All right, 13 is the neighborhood traffic management program policy revision and annual project approval. And I do want to just mention, kind of before discussion, this is one area where, in a preview of the budget that you will see, hopefully about a week from now, I'm going to put some more general fund capital dollars in here. So just to make everyone aware, because I know getting further down the road, no pun intended, with this is an area of interest. So,
Sure.
Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I was just looking over the list, and I'm glad to hear you're going to do that. I'm just wondering, though, too, I mean, with the list, it says, complete the list of 12 streets there. No, I'm sorry, I was on the page, but I'm on something else here. It's on the page that has the list. There were two highlighted ones. I was wondering why Forest Heights and Club Drive were highlighted yellow. I didn't understand that. Why Forest Heights on the agenda report?
Yeah.
In attachment 3. For this item, they were highlighted yellow. I didn't. Okay, I think it's maybe based on your list that you sent, that maybe they haven't finished wrapping up the citizen part of it yet. Is pending votes, okay.
Yeah, they're doing the votes now.
Oh, the residents are doing the votes,
They got the
okay.
information, so they're doing the votes now.
Okay.
I'm not
But
sure
you-
I'm not sure what the deadline to get those back in.
Okay.
But, all the postcards and it's been sent out to everybody in the neighborhood, so hopefully they'll be coming back in soon.
So those qualify based on the numeric criteria,
I
but are
got
just
you.
waiting for the neighborhood final feedback.
Well, I will say this about the total. It's 950,000 or 940,000 for all of the streets, which I'm supportive of doing all the streets in the recommendations that the citizens have already looked at. So what I guess the concern is, it doesn't look like we're changing that criteria that much that affects those that were already in process and then changing. You see where I'm going? I mean, it's kind of, if it were doing that, I'd have a little bit more concerns, but it doesn't seem to be changing that criteria to where, the new criteria shoves somebody off the list that's already been through the process. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I would agree with
I
your
was kind of
assessment on
looking at
that.
your list. I don't think I noticed that, but I will say this, I hope we'll find a way to make sure that this 940,000 gets funded so that these folks who have been through the process and have done the work and have reached the 65%, because that's not easy to do, to reach that 65%, that they get the recommendation that's listed here. It looks like we have about 300 and something thousand that's currently available for 2023, this current fiscal year. How much are we anticipating is going to be available for 2024 with SPLOST and whatever the mayor puts in his budget? Do we know that number?
No, but we can find that out.
Because that's gonna matter to me and maybe hopefully to some others when we go to vote on this or vote on the budget, that we make sure that these streets are covered within at least the 2024 budget cycle.
And if I could.
Because we don't want to get behind, y'all. That's the other thing. We don't want to constantly just be behind and trying to play catch up, which we may be in that position, but if there's something we can do about it, then we should.
Sure. And I'll tell you what we've been struggling with a little bit, and we can talk more about it for sure. And that's, everything we do, whether it's pavement or the sidewalk gap or a future dirt road program, what have you, it's always based on the need, not the location or chronological. But I understand from kindergarten that there's a certain order to being in line and waiting your turn. It could result, though, in something being funded that rates lower because it was first in line to something not getting funded that's actually a bigger need in the back end.
Well, and I appreciate that, but also in thinking about this in terms of differently, I mean, and knowing that there's dollars available, but we could try to find some more to put in there. Maybe one option is to also look at the recommendations and saying, all right, well, these 12 streets, instead of 6 speed tables, everybody will get 3, and then you see where I'm going, and then we'll come back and add more speed tables once the money's made available. So at least get something on the ground to help calm the traffic in the neighborhoods.
Sure.
And then go back and finish it up as funding is available.
Okay. And let me talk to staff about that. I understand the intent there, and I don't know how much, just from a mobilization standpoint, having the contractor on site, if it's better just to knock it all out, move on. But I hear you, and we want to hear different alternatives.
Carol?
Yeah, besides the funding, which I need to delve deeper into, but I think that the big change here, and I really appreciate it, is the addition of the 2 more criteria that we'd be voting on, including the existing transportation infrastructure, so that if there's an absence of sidewalks and there's no way to get off the road to be safe, that street gets more points, and also, really importantly, the historical crash data, both of those things. And I noted, looking on this, one street, for example, that it really, adding those 2 criteria to Arch Street really jumped up. Now, I haven't studied closely how much funding is available, but I think that's important to note, that it does make a big difference for some streets in the priority rating. And I appreciate the addition of those 2 criteria.
If I could, I'm sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt, but Commissioner Hamby, I have an answer for you.
Okay.
Staff provided it. Thank you all. There's $100,000 available for T-SPLOST funds in '24.
Okay, but we can shift that if we need to, I mean, as far as the tiering goes, because that's not going to get us, that'll get us one of these projects.
You can always shift the tiering, yes,
Right.
if there's
But-
available
and
funds.
if the mayor will keep that in his mind as he's forming the budget, because obviously it could be under a capital program.
And they may not have sent this to you, Blaine, but is that pretty much static for the next few
Sounds
fiscal
like it may be,
years?
yeah.
That's what I recall.
Yeah.
Is that there's kind of a level, but we can check on that.
I believe so.
Melissa?
Yeah, I was not on the commission when y'all had the work session on this, but I am grateful to see this moving forward, and I am all for finding that funding however we can in our budget sessions coming up. And I'm grateful to see Arch Street and streets like that, because we have areas of this community that have long been overlooked and never got sidewalk investment. I'm thrilled to see Waddell Street, because once upon a time, there was a proposal for sidewalks there, but it would have taken people's front yards and put up ugly retaining walls and taken out trees. And so I think that, seeing these communities get that speed attention that they need, I still think that we need to, I'm going to be talking with State Representative Fry about state legislation and some of the barriers we have to actually being able to enforce speeding in our neighborhoods. So, this is one solution, and as we see, it's expensive, but I think it needs to be coupled with, better enforcement. Because we have problems with street racing in our community, and I had someone trying to get around me on Evans Street as kids were loading out of the Boys and Girls Club, and when I finally got to Broad Street, they went around me and floored it going up Broad. So I think we need to get a comprehensive approach to how we go after speeders and reckless, careless drivers in our community.
Ovita?
Well, I guess I've been kind of wrestling with this for a while, and I had reached out to TPW last year, well, I guess it was last year, and kept trying to get the streets that were, that had speed bumps and other traffic calming. And it took me a minute, and it should not have taken me that long. Because when I looked at the first sheet they gave me, one particular street was not on there. But when I persisted, it was on there twice. And then I drove down that street. They have nine speed humps. So I hope our process is going to be more equitable. And just because somebody doesn't send back a postcard or speak up, we know those areas that have been neglected. So it goes back to what I was talking to Commissioner Houle about. we come up with a plan, but we also got to make sure that there may be some things that we need to set aside and do something different. We need to plan that way. Just because this is how we do it, and then folk get left out, and it may be their fault, I don't know. But I do know that this one street with the 9 speed humps is in a very plush neighborhood where other folk live at, and I don't understand it. So let's be conscientious and I guess I'm suggesting this to Manager Blaine. Let's have a plan too for areas that may not be giving back feedback.
We have a policy commissioner. The fact that there's 9 in a plush neighborhood is not staff. It's the commission approved that at a certain point. And if they need to be changed, if the policy needs to be changed, then that's at the discretion of the commission. We're glad to do that.
Again, I don't know when it happened. I don't know when it happened.
Well,
And
but
I'm
if
not
it did,
blaming-
it had to be the commission that approved it. so.
Well, the first 4 were there. When I drove back after I asked for that second report, that's when I saw the other 4. I'm just saying.
I'm glad to sit with you afterwards and understand it. I don't know if I fully understand the question, but in matters of equity and resource allocation, you know, there's a policy here, and you suggest that, well, maybe folks don't speak up, they should still have a chance. We're going to follow the policy that's approved by the mayor and commission, and certainly equity is important in all things we do, and if the commission wants to revisit it and come up with different variations on that, glad to do that, but I just want to be careful and not suggest that staff is, you know, doing things here and not there. We're just following the policy.
And just in terms of our recent processes, commissioners did a good job with outreach when we put the T-SPLOST package together, and we were able to direct funds to some neighborhoods of longstanding need. And certainly with our broadly available programs, like neighborhood traffic management, you know, I think it's incumbent on all of us to engage with staff so we know how the program works, and then engage with the public so we can do program delivery in each neighborhood that we represent. Sorry, I've got a handful. Jesse.
Thank you. Yeah, it kind of echoes what Commissioner Thornton was saying, but, you know, I appreciated the email we got from you, Manager Williams, in advance on the 11th that had a bunch of attachments. And in there's the NTMP ranked full list. And on it, number 1 is Old Monroe Road, and number 5 is Westchester Drive. And I know I've asked about these repeatedly in meetings about NTMP, but neither of those are ready on the ready list. Neither of those are listed as getting funded this year. And those are by the criteria that we currently have, number 1 and number 5, and by the proposed criteria that would include crash and sidewalk data, still number 1 and number 5. So I am personally deeply concerned about the number 1 and number 5 projects not making the top 13 in this year's budget recommendations when I've been on about them for about 2 years straight. So any clarity staff can provide on why they're not there, or how we can get them there, or what it's going to take to get them there would be greatly appreciated. And I really hope that the rationale is not because they have T-SPLOST projects, because when we approved the T-SPLOST project tiering list, I specifically asked about these 2 projects not being deprioritized in the NTMP.
All right,
When
I'll
we
address that,
deprioritize
Commissioner.
those projects
And again, I want
in
to be
T-SPLOST,
careful
so.
about the inference that somehow staff is nefarious in doing something here. Those neighborhoods could not reach a consensus. That is part of the policy that the commission approved. When neighborhoods reach consensus, they get moved in there, and that's noted on that attachment that I sent you, that there are some that are and some that aren't. So this is, you know, staff trying to do this in an equitable manner. We talk about equity. It's not about assigning resources equally amongst all the districts. It's not about assigning the districts the resources to wealthy neighborhoods under this policy. It's about where the need is, and there is a part of this where the neighborhood has to come together and agree on that, and that can be contentious sometimes. Because sometimes the speeders live in the neighborhood, so.
And
that
just
works.
haven't seen lots of these projects kind of roll out and then ultimately hit the ground. Sometimes it's taken many swings at bat for the neighborhood to say, yeah, this is what we want. We want a traffic circle here, we want a speed table there. Sometimes that just takes comfort level that is not an overnight phenomenon.
And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that there is a conspiracy among staff to keep these from being on there. It's just, when I see those listed by staff's own assessment as number 1 and number 5, but not on the list, I'd hope that whatever we're approving is going to also help us find a way to get those over the finish line as part of what we're approving, because it's helpful to have that clarity, but what are the steps we're going to take to figure out that consensus among those residents? Because
And that's something.
whatever's going on with how we're approaching this process, I can tell you as the representative of those neighborhoods that I've heard repeatedly from the people who live there, that they have deep concerns about the dangers on those streets. And so I don't know what's breaking down in this process, but I really feel like it's a priority for us to figure out how to get number 1 and number 5 over the finish line. And that's also why it was so important to me to keep the inclusion of renters in the policy, because these are renter-heavy neighborhoods. But those are the people who are walking down the street and risking their lives to just, go to the neighbor's house. So,
Well, and we welcome your involvement to help broker a consensus in those neighborhoods.
thank you.
Tiffany?
I also have a quick question. I've known that Nellie B Avenue has always asked for speed calming, as far as speed bumps as well as speed trackers. My question is, how did Art Street, which is not a main street that has the new developments coming, number 2 to get 5 speed bumps, but the main road, the main artery, which has the most traffic, is not on here?
So,
I can,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mayor. And I'm going on what I think it is, and I can follow up with what we know it to be. But that's part of the, I guess, for the, your average resident, they don't understand that. But when you put these devices, particularly speed humps, when you have higher speeds, it's more dangerous with those things. And so these NTMP are really meant for some of the lower volume streets, but where you still have problems. When you start getting into bigger streets or higher level traffic, that's when we start to kind of pare back a little bit, because we don't want to introduce obstructions in the roadway.
So
Otherwise known as a collector. So
or an artery. Yeah.
there are different types of roads. So there's neighborhood streets, which this applies to. Then there's collectors, which I suspect Nellie B is. And then the arteries are like College Station Road, where you're really moving folks through. And the NTMP is really meant for the lower level designation.
And so introducing something like roundabouts is generally what you would do with something of the volume of an LEB. The speed humps, as much as, I think they're the go-to NTMP device in a lot of minds, you generally need to have a roadway posted speed at 25 or lower. So I've got a handful of folks. Mike?
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to say, I think this discussion highlights the demand that we're all hearing about traffic calming in neighborhoods. And I know Tim Griffith over the years has not heard as much until fairly in the past few years about traffic calming. So I think we ought to keep that in mind as we do look at the budget and do look at where we can help neighborhoods who are looking to build consensus do that. I was, over in Kingswood, as some of y'all know, I was trying to work for a long, it was a good long process on that one, and I think we were 3 or 4 votes shy of getting the required criteria for the thing. So there is the criteria in there that we probably ought to take a look at as we move forward. But I think the main thing I'm taking away from this is let's see what we can do to meet the demand that our neighbors and residents are asking for. So.
And I do have an answer for Commissioner Taylor. I'm sorry to interject. Staff let me know that they will be bringing, because we've heard this before, right? And it's a reasonable request. So staff's working on a new policy for speed management on non-residential roads, and we'll be bringing that forward, and we can talk more about that. Thank you.
Got Melissa and then Carol.
Yeah, I think I can address some of what Commissioner Thornton is speaking about. This, I believe, is the 4th version of the MTMP that I've had to deal with since I got on the commission in 2015. It's been tweaked multiple times in those years. And when I first got on the commission, it was not easy to get speed bumps. The criteria were pretty high. You had to have a whole lot of volume and really high speeds going through your neighborhood. You had to have all homeowners weighing in. That's how Boulevard was able to get its speed bumps in probably, 2000, the ones on the west end of Boulevard, the traffic circle and speed bumps. And there were some serious problems at that traffic circle area. I believe there were collisions on the reg. And it's tons of kids walking through the neighborhood. The more contemporary speed bumps, the ones that just happened in the past half year or so, it took about 3 years for those to work their way through a system through the second iteration of the NTMP. And that NTMP had been updated to just allow for lower volume and lower speed percentiles. Since then, we've updated the MTMP more to allow for more equity concerns like sidewalks and having renters weigh in. And from what I see here, it's been updated even more to make it even easier, which is what gets us to where we are with a long list of roads that have gone through this process where neighbors are consulted and there's a neighborhood consensus. And we have $1 million we need to spend to meet these needs. And God knows there are needs everywhere else in the community. I gave TPW a long list. And yeah, Arch Street was on it and Waddell was on it. So I'm happy to see those. And I know that they've gone through the process because Waddell has been begging for the, traffic calming since I first got on the commission 9 years ago. So that's how long it's been taking to get to where we are. Hopefully, we can get there quicker with more of these criteria. But, the fact of the matter is, in the past, it was only neighborhoods who had it together, who were already organized and had long-term homeowners who were, regularly in communication with each other and going door to door. We could probably use some kind of staff help in some of the door-to-door work in some of these communities. But yeah, that's how our speed bumps happened in the past. We do have a more equitable policy now, which is why we see so many more streets on this list.
Carol?
Yeah, I found a new document that goes way back, and I'm not sure how many of these speed tables were put in before we had a policy at all. Because I am looking historically, there's some starting in 1999 that are in there. And I would assume that in 2002, for example, there was not a policy. It was just, do we know what comes in what happened back then? Was it just whoever could get the most attention in the commission?
At least from '06 on, there was a policy. And I think it's just evolved over time.
Okay, but some of that, looking at the numbers, the maps, if I were looking at them, for example, I would be like, man, so a whole lot in some neighborhood. And it happens to actually be a neighborhood that I live in right now, and I'm like, where did they come from? But they're there from it's 20-something odd years ago. So I just, the point really I wanted to make was just that this policy wasn't always in place. And so now we have the more equitable policy, and I'm glad of that. And I know to Commissioner Hoole's concern, we have to go and change the policy if we don't want, you can see that there's not enough people who have been to reach the consensus. So if that's something that we need to look at down the line, that's something we need to look at. And how that goes about and whatever. So, I think we are following a process that's in here. I do want to add something to what Mayor Gertz said, because I noticed that you mentioned traffic circles as something for, what do we call, what's the Nelly Biggs?
Yeah, like a roundabout.
Right, but I do notice that there are some, I think that can be confusing because some of these, some of the suggested ways of dealing with the traffic include traffic circles in this list. So traffic circles are also used within the neighborhood roads as well, not just on the larger roads, not just speed tables.
And Mayor, we may want to have a work session on this, I don't know, because it seems like there's a lot of questions and concerns. And I do want to point out, Commissioner Link, we don't have the staff resources to do door-to-door interaction on all of these. Now, in lieu of that, to make sure that somebody's actually receiving something about this, we are doing postcards, certified mail. It costs a little bit more, but it's, hopefully getting to folks.
Yeah, no, and you know, I'll say broadly, I think this is an area where everyone wants to see a solution crafted to their neighborhood, and thus, if somebody's got a challenge, whether that's not enough neighbors willing to come to a public meeting, or not exactly the solution they had in mind, the demands of Waddell are going to be differently perceived than the demands of Arch Street or the demands of Cedar Shoals Drive, and so, you know, it does make it tough. You know, people want safety in their neighborhoods, and I don't think that's ever going to not be a phenomenon in our experience as public policy makers, and so getting there means we're often back at the table. So, Avita.
A suggestion, since we don't have staff, we have a group of people that get paid called neighborhood leaders, and they know their communities. Let them bring us back some information. Let's look at the policy, and if it needs to be tweaked, that Commissioner Hull and we always seem to go to the bottom because Saxon Woods was number 2 on the list. I think that the neighborhood we are not using those boots on the ground as well as we could be. They should be knowing what each of the districts, commission districts, some needs are. They're meeting these folk one-on-one and in small groups. And I think that would be a resource that, because it's really getting kind of hard to keep explaining to folk in District 9, 2, and 3 why they keep getting left out. And we have resources, we just probably need to use and then we also need to look at our policy.
All right, 14 is the Costa Building Renovation General Contractor Award. You've seen a memo on this. We've kind of gone back to the table a couple of times, and I, for one, am ready to see some renovations next door.
Can we, is it consent agenda appropriate? It's got all the numbers in it?
Costa Building with consent?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, I like hearing
The
that.
history started in 1972, just saying.
All right. This is not going to drag on as long as Clayton Street, my friends. All right.
Can I ask it?
Please.
If we're leaving it on consent, now's the time to ask, I guess.
Yep.
Could you provide just a high-level overview of, with this bid coming in, you know, what can we expect is definitely going to be built in and what's, you know, maybe going to get built in?
With the Costa building?
Yeah.
Everything that was in the memo, so it's basically the base bid and the alternates, the add alternates that we added because we weren't quite sure. Sorry, I'm speaking in.
Yeah.
So an add alternate is something that you put in the bid, but you have a base bid because you only have so much money, so you want to make sure you can get the base bid done. And then there's extra things that you'd like to see, but you don't know how much they'll cost, so you add those onto the bid too. And in this case, staff's recommending that you go ahead and fund the base bid, all the add alternates, and then provide sufficient contingency to do the work. So basically, and I'll verify this, Commissioner Hull, because I don't want to be dead sure, but I think we're getting pretty much the design that you had voted on prior to this. Now, remember, this funding does not include furniture, fixtures, and equipment and building out the inside, and that's a whole nother level of funding that we'll have to talk about in the future, but this at least gets the building renovated in a state that you had supported at one point.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say all the add alternates that we included, just because there's different lists of the bid alternates,
Okay.
Are you saying all of them or all on that?
Okay.
Last
If you look at
list,
facts and
you see
issues
them.
number 9, that is what's getting funded.
Okay.
Because that 424,000 and number 9 matches the 424 and number 10. So the combined cost is all that, and this is what we're asking, you know, that you fund all of it, and that pretty much fulfills the schematic design that was approved by the commission.
Okay. Pretty amazing. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. 14 on consent. 15 is the articulating ladder truck referenced in our poetry at the beginning of the evening.
Consent.
Melissa?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment about this. I remember hearing a figure in one of our retreats in the fall that it was $7 million we needed for fire equipment. Is that, or did I make that up?
I'd have to go back and revisit it, but it's a considerable amount, for sure.
Yeah. Is this the only ladder truck that we foresee purchasing in the immediate future? Or are there other large pieces of fire equipment?
Well, there are other apparatuses, they're called, that aren't ladders, like engines and others. But yes, there's a whole, I mean, we're in that period where there's life cycle replacement and going on, and we purchased a number of big ticket items. This ladder truck is at the end of its projected useful life, 23 years. Of course, we'd asked for funding in the public safety SPLOST set aside and only got partially funded. So one reason why we're having to come back and ask for money, and we're still trying to figure out how to fund those future ones. If you'll remember, I think you were still in the commission at the time, we created a 10-year plan to try to right-size our funding of fleet. And so we're in the midst of that. And, you know, post-COVID escalation and supply chain logistics and all those things.
Could you describe what kind of structure a ladder truck, like what the scale of a structure that this particular truck would be needed for?
It does depend, and
Okay.
I can
I mean, it would
provide
be
you.
helpful if maybe we could get a tour of these kind of pieces of equipment and
Sure.
have an understanding and speak to the firefighters themselves, you know, as to what kind of structures need what kind of equipment. Because my concern is we've had.
I can have the chief provide that answer to you.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see the trucks. I mean, we
Yeah,
used
sure.
to get to ride on them.
Absolutely.
But, you know, my concern is, you know, we've had this tremendous growth in our community just in the past decade of really large-scale, tall buildings, residential buildings, primarily student housing, and a lot of big structures being built on campus. And those are the kind of structures that need this kind of very expensive equipment. And those on-campus buildings don't contribute to our tax revenues, and that's where I would love to.
Can we stay on point with the
Well,
topic?
I'm talking about funding here, and this is where, you know, we could implement a fire safety fee to require untaxed entities such as the University of Georgia to pay into that fee when it comes to larger scale structures.
Well, I believe as far as the entire array of apparatus goes, you'll see some additional information in the FY24 budget too.
And if I might, so this is a state-of-the-art ladder truck. I'm not sure, not a ladder truck connoisseur, but this is one of the best you can get. So the issue with being able to cover taller buildings, that is being addressed in the budget that I recommended to Mayor Gertz. That's not so much an equipment issue, it's a personnel issue. You just need more folks covering,
Yeah.
because as you can imagine, more people are in the structure and there's jobs. And so, like most things, when we have a big issue we need to tackle, we're coming at you with a 3-year plan to right-size the staff to be able to take on those larger structure fires. But the fact that this ladder truck is also has an articulating, that's very helpful, because, you know, people think about ladders going up, but sometimes you got to go out,
Yeah.
right, and get over or something. So I think the fire chief and the firefighters that assisted him in the evaluation of this is their recommendation. We're just short some money, and we need your consideration.
Well, it'd be good to find an additional revenue stream to see to it that we're properly protected.
Dexter.
So you were talking about the cost. When I was reading the history, I noticed in 2018, when this came up, the commission voted against it. So now we're in the position, now we got to pay a lot more money, because obviously there was no foresight in thinking we need this ladder truck moving forward. So I'm glad to see that we're in a position to purchase this ladder truck and to really help this community. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
And I think
Why did we do that? I don't remember.
Part of SPLOST.
I must have missed that meeting, Dexter. Don't blame me.
I mean,
Was that in the context of T-SPLOST?
I think it was. Yeah.
Whittled down in T-SPLOST.
Yes, I think there was a thought that they were going to fund, it wasn't T-SPLOST, I think it was a
SPLOST.
regular
SPLOST.
SPLOST, and we had talked about the concept of trying to move some of those big demands on general funds over to SPLOST. And, there's always that healthy debate about, well, that's not special, but it is an eligible use. But what happened, so I think the commission, anticipating that they were going to fund that in the SPLOST, tried to use those funds, free those up, general fund dollars, for something else, if I'm remembering correctly. But what ended up happening is the commission didn't approve the full requested amount, but a partial amount as recommended by the T-SPLOST committee. So we ran short there, which, that's not the sole reason we've got a long-term plan to right-size fleet funding. Some of that occurred years ago, but all that compounds together.
And it's my recollection, too, that we had been saving money in the general fund for the purpose of buying a fire truck, I thought, within the capital projects list.
Well, each year, the funds for general fund capital come out of that year's revenues. Now, we do have surplus from leftover from old salary savings, but in the fleet replacement fund, Commissioner, with those transfers out, there are some set-asides. Now, one thing I want to caution you all on, and I think a lot of folks just automatically assume that each vehicle has its own little savings account. Doesn't quite work that way, because some cars are lemons and some aren't, and so staff generally keeps some funding there. And as you see in the agenda item, fleet replacement's putting a good amount of money in there, coupled with, and sometimes we augment with general fund capital, but typically everything's run through the fleet replacement program fund. If that makes sense.
All right, so ready to do that on consent?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, it's happening, friends. All right. It is now 8:48. If everybody would like to take a short, by short, I'm going to say 7-minute break before our executive session, that would be marvelous. I'll see you back here at 8:55.